Larry Bass is the chairman of Cabinteely and also a member of one of the FAI's finance committees. Larry, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Ger. How are you?
Good. So you've had a relatively prominent role in this story becoming public over the last few days. Can you maybe spool us back a couple of days to the point where I think you actually wrote a letter to Roy Barrett? Is that how this began to emerge?
I've written a few letters to Roy Barrett. I suppose you need to spool back further. I was one of these people that post the governance review last summer. I was asked to put myself forward for a couple of committees on the FAI through the FAI Council. I put my name forward for the Finance Committee because I felt I could bring some experience to bear. I've been on finance, audit and risk committees of national boards. And I thought that, the FAI is something that needed to clean up its Governance Act. I think that was one of the things that was pretty obvious. So I was looking forward to getting my sleeves rolled up and helping out if I can and trying to, help chart a path back to successful football association. And as Roy and both Gary have both said, we need to put the past behind us and move on with the football. But unfortunately, they haven't covered themselves in glory when it comes to corporate governance. The simple effect of having a finance committee overseeing the using the fiduciary duties to just question the financial arrangements or implications for the organisation, they haven't met. So I can see no reason. They keep kicking the touch and giving excuses, saying there was no terms of reference. Well, there was. They said they weren't happy with the terms of reference. Yet, there's an interim board, an interim chair, an interim CEO. You could have an interim finance committee and still have the questions and get on with it. So excuses aren't good enough. I would like to see the finance committee being established and doing what it's supposed to do. It's not there to.
Can I just I'm sorry to interrupt because obviously Gary Owens isn't here, and I don't want to get bogged down in this part of the story too much because there's loads to get our teeth into. But Gary Owens did tell Joe on last night's show that they brought that to the board, and the current board were unhappy with the terms of reference because they felt that it was reducing their power of oversight. Now, whether or not that's true, I suspect you have a different view, and that's fair enough, right? And look, the sooner all these committees get up and running and are reporting to the board, and we all have a sense of those committees functioning properly, which is, I think, what we want, then that would be good. Was that enough for you? Was that enough of a red flag straight away? Do you have any sympathy with the view that, like, your committee gets formed last, I think, October, and the new independent chair comes in January, and then the CEO comes in after that? So technically it's not their committee, and I can understand that there was a massive flaming fire, the house is on fire over here with the possibility of the entire organisation going bust. You probably want to put that fire out first before this fire over here. Maybe they should have been doing a little bit of firefighting on both sides.
Yeah, if you're going into a forest fire, you want to make sure you've got cover all around. And I think ignoring simple corporate governance when you're doing something on an organisation where corporate governance was to the fore is careless, is the best way I could describe it, for if nothing else. And I think if there was an issue, if the board had a concern over the terms of reference, which nobody had said anything about that up until these recent excuses started coming out. It was never conveyed to us there was any issue. They should have just met, and if there was to be parameters around what the finance committee could say or do, that could be put in place. But just ignoring it and not putting in place, I was elected by the council, so I'm answering to the council. As a person on the finance committee representing the council, I was asking questions in relation to finance. And when it came to hearing that Roy Barrett was potentially conflicted in his role as the chair through any relationship he may have with the single biggest creditor, I just have to ask the question. I asked the question. And to me, I don't believe it's been answered correctly. If you have one single creditor who are the major creditor, and then that creditor has a role in whatever the role is in appointing the person who's going to oversee the negotiation on that debt, that simply feels to me incorrect.
Just to play devil's advocate and just to tease this out a little bit, okay? Neil Reardon had a piece last week where the more details of this emerged, right? He said that Barrett secured the job when 2 preferred candidates declined and a third was not approached. Like, in that instance, I can see how AMROP end up going, OK, look, we need a list of people here. The first 2 people we've gone to have said no thanks, and then a third candidate's not approached. I don't know why the third candidate wouldn't have been approached, but it doesn't seem like there was a whole slew of people queuing up to take this gig.
I wasn't part of that process. My understanding is there were a number of names or candidates preferred, and out of the blue, Roy's name came into the fold. Look, I've never met Roy. I've never had a conversation with the man, and he could be an absolute fantastic chair. I just think the way this is operated is incorrect. As a member of the Finance Committee, I was questioning it. And we do have to get our house in order. We do have to get things right. But, shutting up shop on one of the most serious parts of corporate governance and just ignoring it. And you now have a situation where, thankfully now we can move on. A decision is made, and I'm a Democrat like everybody else. And we can try and move on and do the work that's supposed to be done. But the Finance Committee still hasn't been put together. The latest I heard was it might be convened in March. But if I'm led to believe what Gary Owens is saying, they're bringing in the right and proper test for all candidates for these committees. So am I right and proper? Are others? There's nothing to stop the committee being formed, post AGM at least at the latest, as far as I'm concerned, not waiting until March.
Sorry, March next year?
Well, that's what Gary Owens said in a recent interview about it.
That does seem to be quite far away. I think you're right to be asking questions. I think given the amount of public money that's gone in, and given the fact that essentially the final guarantee on a portion of the loan, some of it seems to be being guaranteed by UEFA and FIFA, and some of it seems to be being guaranteed by the government. So absolutely, I think everybody wants a strong finance committee, which isn't just controlled by the board, essentially, because like this, there needs to be checks and balances, and certainly history shows that the more checks and balances there are in all of our sports organisations, the better it's going to be. Do you have concerns that the board were concerned about the powers of the finance committee, if that story is accurate?
Well, if they're concerned, what is the problem? Let's hear about it. That's what openness and transparency is. And I would question the minister. The previous minister obviously had a close relationship with Roy, and the incumbent minister, I don't know what her relationship is, but asking questions about some of the roles and just getting all the facts, I would have thought is critical. Nobody has contacted me. It's no secret that I had questions about the various aspects, and if the government are going to stand over something, you would think that they would check out all the facts around these things. Sport Ireland, again, I've had no conversations there. They don't have to contact me, but all I did was ask questions. That's what I see the role of a finance committee or an audit and risk committee. You're not there to do the work. You're not there to do the negotiation. You're not there to set out the agenda for spending the cash, but you are there to oversee and ask questions. Is it being done correctly? Nothing else.
How many people are on that committee, as a matter of interest? How many of you are there?
Well, there were 2 elected through the council, and then there needed to be somebody, I think, from the board would be appointed probably as the chair of the committee, and then a couple of independent members. That's my understanding, but because we haven't met, I couldn't honestly answer any more. But a finance committee that I've been on previously could be anything from 3 people to 5 people.
And just explain for people who are listening who might be unfamiliar, if you're not setting out financial policy and you're not doing deals, what exactly are you doing?
Well, you're questioning that some of the executive and or the board are setting out policy, that you're there as a sort of the full stop to make sure that the right and correct questions have been asked. I mean, that's why I've said, I'd like to have seen, as a finance committee member, I'd like to have seen some cost-benefit analysis on the options. I mean, there was one option put to the council last night, and that option, having spent 6 months trying to control the board and wanting to have control of the board, They capitulated a couple of weeks ago to change the rules to allow the president to have the casting vote rather than the chair, and also to extend term for people who've been there for over 10 years. So, as you'd rightly said, things were negotiable. The only thing that seems to be not negotiable is the actual debt. So a couple of things I would like to have seen. I'd like to have seen cost-benefit analysis on where the debt negotiation's going, cost-benefit analysis on other options, up to and including, liquidation, examinership. What can you do to give choice? None of that was made apparent. And, there's been chapter and verse in history of where examinership have helped organisations and companies not only fix financial issues, but get stronger and better. And we didn't see any discussion about that. And I'm just asking the questions. That's all I am.
So can you explain maybe to people what an examinership might have looked like, or a successful examinership in this instance might have looked like? Because I guess certainly from listening to the unions, they were very concerned about the potential for job losses. And, Gary Owens last night said the only show in town was the debt and the government deal, that he picked up the phone to other potential lenders and couldn't even get a meeting.
Yeah, that's, and again, I wasn't in any of those conversations, so I don't know. All I'm saying is there are other options, and they didn't talk about examinership. And with examinership, and, I feel for all the employees, you have to remember as well, there are over 200 people working in the FAI, and they do a fantastic job. And they've done an extremely fantastic job during the teeth of all of this. When all of this is going on above their heads, and yet they've got to get on and do the day job. So, hats off to every single individual employee. One thing with an examinership is you get the protection of the courts, number one. So until all the details of the business is looked at and a plan is brought out, you just don't start laying people off. And you restructure the organisation to what it should be and what it can be in the future, including negotiating with all the creditors and setting out a new plan to work within its means. Currently, the FAI, if it's to meet its debt repayments, it's going to be living a little bit beyond its means. It's not going to have an awful lot of free cash available to put into Irish football and develop the facilities that are badly required.
Shouldn't they pay their debts, though? Isn't that the right thing to do for any organisation, particularly a sports organisation?
Of course they should, but also anyone who provides credit needs to make sure that before they give the credit, there's the means to repayment. So, there's all sorts of negotiations need to be taken on and looked into. And all I was looking for was, what were the options? What happened? Asking just simple questions that I felt was required to be asked. Still haven't heard answered.
Do you think it was realistic to expect that the Bank of Ireland would offer a write-down, given that ultimately they know UEFA and FIFA have loads of money, and there's whatever the tenancy agreement is on the Aviva, at some point there is a value to that, although it's very difficult to crystallise exactly what that might be, and that the government were unlikely on their watch to allow the FAI to go into liquidation? Certainly, maybe they might have had some appetite for examinership, but again, I'm not sure about that in the middle of the crisis. That ultimately Bank of Ireland are in a very strong position going, we're happy to refinance, but you're going to have to pay your debts.
I can't answer. I'm not here to negotiate for Bank of Ireland. They're well capable of doing that. It seemed to have done a very good job in this case. But I think, questions have to be asked. If Bank of Ireland senior personnel are suggesting to people to head up the organisation they're going to have to negotiate with. That's all. I question that. I do question the fact that there was no negotiation of the debt, none whatsoever. I actually think the FAI had a strong hand as well. What is the market for a part share in a national stadium? So if the bank were going to call in the loan, they were sitting on a property that they had a part share of, that's not a very strong hand. So I'll sit down and negotiate with anyone and put all the cards on the table and drive the hardest bargain as possible.
So is that ultimately your contention here, is that you don't feel like the FAI got a good deal? Is that because, ultimately,
because I haven't seen the details of it, and I have asked. That's what the Finance Committee should be doing, is overseeing these things and seeing all the papers related to it. All I'm doing is asking the questions, and I would like to have seen what the options were. I'd like to see in any sort of business, whether it's big or small, you should do cost-benefit analysis on the various decisions that are going to affect the ongoing future of the business. And we just didn't see it. That's all.
Look, again, Gary Owens isn't here, right? But he did say that the only show in town, we were 2 weeks from going bust. We had to do a deal. No one was offering us finance. Like, if you spool back to that point in time, the FAI was a toxic brand. It's a little less toxic now, but still, it's going to be very interesting to see what sponsors come on board as the main sponsors for the next while. It's not in a very good position. The cost-benefit analysis might not have resulted in a hugely different, and I don't know that they didn't do one. You were saying you haven't seen it, and that's fair enough. Were there multiple options at that point, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't in that place where I could, I wasn't in the driving seat having those conversations. And I'll take Gary's word for it that if there was no other game in town. But all I'm saying is that there was questions that I was asking as a Finance Committee member, and I wanted to ask them within the Finance Committee, so we weren't, these things could be answered there and then and dealt with. But because they elected not to proceed with convening the Finance Committee, I felt it was my fiduciary duty on behalf of the people who elected me, which were the council members, to ask simple questions. I also decided, unlike some other colleagues on other committees who got exasperated and just left and resigned from committees, I just feel that if I'm going to be taken off the committee, then it's up to the council to remove me, and until I'm removed, I'll have to continue asking questions. That's what I was elected to do.
So you're going to stay. You're going to stay the course, and that's good to hear, because it feels like these questions are absolutely necessary. Is it possible that the organisation, as it's constituted now, can appoint a finance committee and begin to function properly, or is this current board and the chairman and the CEO, do you feel like there's no recovery from the position that they put themselves in, as far as you're concerned?
I've called for the resignation of the independent members of the board, with the exception of Robert Watt, who joined it late, because I feel the oversight in this matter is questionable. And I think the FAI, above anything else, needs to have squeaky clean corporate governance. End of story, full stop. And if it's going to be, the brand is going to be reborn, if it's going to achieve the heady heights of Battalion 90 and all of that good stuff that it should be doing. You've got the Irish girls, ladies international team starting to now achieve the heights of, stratospheric performance, and all our underage teams. And hopefully now Stephen Kenny's new brush will do the same. The football side of it is thankfully going really well. We need to get our house in order off the pitch. And I was trying to make sure that it was starting from a squeaky clean start with all full transparency. And I believe, I'm a full believer in clear transparency. It's the ultimate power. If things aren't transparent, questions get asked.
Can I just ask why the difference between the independent directors and the elected football directors? Why do you exempt the elected football directors from your call for resignation?
Because my feeling is that the independent directors' number one duty will be to ask the questions independent of all the people who have been involved in football for many years. And I would have thought that's their job. They're there to put on the board to oversee the football side and make sure everything has been done correctly. And frankly, corporate governance for me is the foundation.
But once you're on the board, you're on the board. You're not on the board with a specific role unless you're actually appointed on to a specific committee. So, for example, if an independent member of the board gets appointed the chair of your finance committee, then they have responsibility to report back to the board. But once you're in the boardroom, once the meeting starts, everybody's equal.
Yeah, but I think the independent people have been brought in so that they're there to, question what's going on, and that's why everybody wanted to see a board, and I applaud the fact that there's a new board and there is independent members. But I was questioning their appointment if they're not actually doing the basic details of corporate governance. Maybe they were inside the boardroom, but you were not seeing it outside.
Okay. Do you have confidence in the independent chair now?
I think there's a question over this appointment, and I've all I can do is ask the questions, and it's up to the independent chair to answer them.
So
for
he
me,
did answer them last night, as far as he's concerned, Larry. And in fairness to him, he says that what happened was Amrop approached him, and he phoned one of the people who talked to Amrop to see what the crack was before he got the gig. And then he takes the gig. So he's, as far as he's concerned, has answered that. And I suppose it's a question for you as somebody who's steeped in football in Ireland, a chair of a League of Ireland club. Do you have confidence in the independent chair at the moment?
I'm going to reserve my position on that and see how things play out. And I still think there's questions to be answered in the relationship between the main creditor. And I'd like to see the full resolution and answers on that. We're living in a different Ireland now. This is an Ireland that doesn't take, lightly simple questions on where there may be a conflict of interest. And until there's absolute proof positive there isn't, you have to ask the question. Simple as.
Okay, so if there was proof positive that there wasn't a conflict of interest, that would be the point where you would say I have confidence. What would, in terms of reserving your position, what would force you to say you don't have confidence?
Well, if I feel that there was something untoward and there was nothing being done, but at the moment I believe that the ignoring of the convening of two of the key committees, for me, I have questioned it. That's why I wrote to Roy in the first place, and question things, because it seems to be the only way to get an answer is you have to send a letter. And then when you send a letter and ask for it to be copied to every member of the board, suddenly it's in the press before half of them even read it. So that seems to be the way to get any answers. It's unfortunate, but that's not the way it should be done if the committees were convened and we could all ask questions in the form that they should be done.
So last week's New Era launch, you're not convinced that we've begun a new era just yet?
Look, it's teething problems, I hope. And I do hope and wish everybody well in trying to drive on. But if there's a cloud and it has to be blown away, I would concern myself in getting all that done correctly and done first. Because the FAI can't live under any cloud. The FAI needs to be reborn and get back to what it's there to do. Next year it's 100 years old, and it would be great to get into that year with the organisation in fine fettle, with a great foundation and every part of it unquestionably in great hands. Larry
Bass, Chairman of Cabinteely and a member of the as yet unconstituted Finance Committee. Thanks very much for joining us this morning and giving us your reaction to yesterday's vote.